Hey, what's going on, everybody? I want to welcome you to our third week of the podcast. My name is Dan. I'm the online pastor. This is Pastor Nathan, our Boise campus pastor.
Folks.
Nice. And we're joined with the one and only Ron Smith. How you doing
Hey,
today?
come on.
Let's
Round
do
of
it.
applause
Yeah,
for
hey.
Ron.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's just great to be hanging out with you two guys.
I know. We got coffee, LaCroix. It's going to be a great day.
I'm glad we scheduled it a little later, too, because give me a chance to wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a big talker normally, so later in the days, the better.
You save all your words like they save up, and then you just let them build and build and build, and then podcast.
Yeah, podcast. Here we go. I won't have any words left after the next 30
That's
minutes
all right.
or so.
That's
We
awesome.
feel so honored and privileged that you're giving us all of your words.
There you go.
Yeah. You're going to go home and have nothing to say. You're just gonna-
Tanya wanted to ask me, what'd you guys talk about? I'll
like-
tell you later.
You're going to have to wait till
Talk tomorrow afternoon, preferably. It's awesome. Yeah, so we used to work out together, so I feel like it's been a while.
I miss you, man.
Yeah, I haven't been to the gym much lately, but here we are.
Well, I actually was thinking about you this morning when I was coming over here as far as the gym goes, and I remember this guy, pound for pound, is one of the strongest people I've ever worked out with. But I remember when I was going to ask you, what did it feel like when you pushed 200 pounds for the first time? Because I remember we were working on that as a goal.
I think the word was finally that went in my head.
Finally.
Pound for pound, though, that makes me feel like I'm a
Pound for pound, like a
Like a
heavyweight
boxer or
fighter. Pound for
something.
pound.
like,
Yeah.
watch out, Connor.
There you go.
Anyway, so today, this is our third week. We've been talking about fasting kind of this past month, and we're kind of closing up 21 days of prayer and fasting. And this week, we kind of want to talk about rhythms and just daily lives and really getting back into how do we do this? Because I know you guys see this, or I mean, I used to see this when I went to the gym, but when you would see people come in January and then they would disappear after a while, and I think something similar happens where in January everybody's excited about a new year, about getting started, but oftentimes the habits and the rhythms don't exactly stick, and so we kind of want to talk a little bit about this, and so that's why we invited you, Ron, and maybe you could just kind of share your story, and we were talking earlier just about how your story could impact so many people and kind of what went on in your life.
Okay, well, I guess, let's see, where can I start with this?
You could really start, if it helps to even tell them a little bit about yourself, your family, what you do now. And
Yeah, well, I'm retired now, fortunately, and I'm loving life. It's absolutely amazing. So it's like when I think back sometimes, or I'll look at the day and think, what did I do today, or what did I accomplish? Not a whole lot, but I guess that's part of the joy of being retired. Is that I don't have a lot of commitments and things like that. So it's mostly time with family, the grandkids. I have two grandsons, and I like to spend time with them. Still try to stay active though. I'm in the gym 6 days a week if I get a chance, and then I enjoy other endeavors as far as endurance and things like that, running, cycling, all that kind of stuff. So, okay, so the background, I'll start off with this is I worked for a company where I traveled all over the state, and then started doing some traveling outside of the state also. So I worked for a chemical company, worked in the food industry, used to travel, take a big loop and go up through Montana, back around, this and that. As my career advanced, I got into a role as a district manager, so I was over Utah and Idaho, had about 13 what they called account managers that worked for me, worked under me. We all worked together, but as a team. But anyway, so I was doing that. Traveling quite a bit, probably working about an average, I would say, of 60 to 70 hours a week. I mean, I was pushing myself really hard. And in the midst of all of that, because I was a runner, I love to be active, and it was actually an outlet for me, a way to relieve some of the stress that I had in my life from all of the work and so forth that I was doing. I love to just get out and just challenge myself physically and mentally. I just push myself, kind of get into a zone where you're not thinking about, all of the other things that are going on around you, or all the pressures that you have, or responsibilities and this and that. So anyways, that was kind of my outlet. So I was doing some triathlons, had a group of friends, Pastor Monty being one of them. We spent a lot of time together, and some other people, and we trained together. And so that was kind of my outlet. And trying to juggle family life with training for triathlons, traveling around, working 60, 70 hours a week. It was kind of a recipe for disaster. And so I had some warning signals early on. I mean, I knew I was stressed. There was no doubt about that. And I could feel the physical symptoms of it sometimes if I was on like a phone conversation, or if I had a meeting, that I was going into. I did a lot of, I feel like I'm talking too fast, am I?
No,
you're good.
I did a lot of kind of what I would kind of frame up as conflict resolution or crisis intervention. We had contracts with large companies and stuff that, spent quite a bit of money on our products. And so when we were having problems, or we were in jeopardy of losing accounts, I would get involved and go in. So usually it was kind of sometimes a rather hostile environment. Everybody's upset about something, and you're just trying to gather information and try to figure out where things break down. What can I do to make it better, and bring some corrective action into it, and so forth and so on. So a lot of stress. Yeah. But I'm kind of an optimist, so I definitely see the glass of water half full instead of half empty. So I kept thinking, if I could just get this into place, it'll get better. If I can just do this, or if I can get that person here, or get this customer here, everything's going to get better, and my life's going to be wonderful. And I was getting compensated well for it, so I had incentives, to stay engaged and to stay, stay moving forward and hold things together. Yeah. The other thing that I'll just throw this out is that I thought that I was, this maybe isn't the best term to use, but invaluable, as far as like, man, if I don't do it, it's going to fall apart. If I don't do it, it's not going to get done. There's no one else here that's capable of doing it. I kind of put myself into that place. And I found out very quickly, when I eventually did blow up and was basically out of my position, out of the role that I was doing overnight, that things pretty much just went on as usual. I wasn't nearly as important as I thought I was. And so I guess that's one thing I would just kind of remind people of, is that. As important as we might feel, our position is, or that we have to have this certain amount of dedication and so forth and so on. Not to burst everybody's bubble, but we're all replaceable. Yeah. I'll say it this way: we're replaceable when it comes to our employers, or things that we're doing, but where we're not replaceable is to the people around us that love us, like our family, our friends, things like that. We're not replaceable there. So hopefully that is where our priority should lie. We should recognize that, hey, we have a certain responsibility to do what we need to do and this and that, but ultimately our first responsibility is to our family and friends, and then to ourselves also. Yeah. Now, I wished I'd have taken that advice, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something interesting that I thought was cool. You just kind of talking about in that where you're working, you're just thinking, once I get this, then I'll be satisfied.
Yeah, everything will be perfect.
Yeah, it's kind of a mentality that I think a lot of us going to deal with is once I reach this place, then I'm not going to have stress anymore. And it's like, it actually creates more stress.
Right.
And it just kind of, I feel like everybody kind of goes through those
Yeah.
seasons where it's like, once I reach this, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a given that we're going to be faced with a certain amount of stress in our lives day in and day out. With social media and all all the stuff that's always going on, it's hard to unplug. It's hard to just detach yourself from everything that's going on.
So tell us, you obviously there was something that happened,
Right.
that was kind of like the tipping point or whatever. Tell us about what happened, what that looked like.
Okay. Yeah, so I was actually, just to give you, so this is an idea of my schedule a little bit. So it's Valentine's Day, and I remember it was a Friday. I was teaching a class at 9 o'clock at night in another town for a company, teaching a class with about 50, 60 people. And as I started the class, I felt like I was going to pass out. Now, I'd had some warning signs before. So I had been on 2 different occasions, and should have been 3, but 3 different occasions actually, where I either went to quick care or I went to the hospital because I felt like I was having a heart attack. I knew I wasn't having a heart attack, or I didn't think so, because I was out running 20, 30 miles, riding my bike, 50, 60 miles and doing all this stuff. And so I'm thinking my heart's probably good. I recognize it's probably stress related. And then they never could find anything. I'd go in, they'd check me all out. Hey, you look great. Everything's fine. You're probably dehydrated or whatever, Yeah. And so I had some warning signs. But this event was new. So as I'm starting to teach the class, everything started spinning, and I thought I was going to pass out, and I'd never had that feeling before. And I actually had it's embarrassing. You're standing up in front of a class, so I had to tell them, hey, I don't know what's going on right now, but I feel like I'm going to pass out. And I said, anyways, I just feel like I'm going to pass out. And I remember somebody grabbed me a chair, and I sat down, and this is how either stupid I am or how dedicated I was, but I went ahead and taught the class just sitting down. I didn't back off and it kind of went away as I went through the class. It kind of backed off, and by the end I was feeling kind of back to normal, but just kind of out of sorts because of because of the event that had happened. Yeah. So I didn't say anything to my wife or anybody, and didn't really think about it that much. Until a couple weeks later, I was doing a spin class over at the rec center, and I was about 45 minutes into the class, and all of a sudden that hit me again. I started spinning and feeling like I was going to pass out, and I'm like, what is going on here? So rather, though, because I didn't want to embarrass myself, and there were other people in the class that I knew, and if I jumped off the bike 45 minutes in, everybody's going to be like, what's the matter? What's going on, And I didn't want to tell people what was happening, so I just backed the resistance off and just kind of faked my way through the last 10 or 15 minutes, and then kind of, said my goodbyes to everybody as we cleaned up. But I knew I was going to end up going into the hospital that night because I knew I was jacked up. So I get home. I just went right in and took a shower because I didn't want to go down there all sweaty and stinky. Took a shower, and I come out, and I told my wife, I said, hey, babe, I said, something's wrong with me. We're going to have to go to the hospital. I feel like I'm going to pass out. I don't know what's happening, and I was just freaking out, So I go in, and I'll try to summarize this a little bit, but they checked me all out. Again, I was fine. They did, CT scans. They did EKGs. They did all of this stuff, and couldn't find, anything wrong. But man, I was like just beside myself, thinking I was dying or something. I was having all these weird thoughts, and things like that were going on. Well, eventually I found out what it was. I was having a panic attack, and I started having these panic attacks literally every 5 to 10 minutes. But but I didn't know anything about panic attacks. I didn't know about anxiety and how it could affect you, and in those ways. So basically, I came home later that day. They kept me. I went in like at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I think I came out at like 4 in the afternoon or something like that. Sent me home. Couldn't find anything, but I'm like, well, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but I basically just felt like I was dying. And I can remember literally for several weeks, I just went from bed to the couch and just praying to God and reading the Bible that I wasn't going to die. But again, I didn't know what was going on. I eventually kind of self-diagnosed myself by reading and researching and what was going on, and I'm like, I'm having panic attacks is what's happening. But along with the panic attacks and the anxiety come all these thoughts of like something's wrong with me physically. Yeah. Wasn't, not just chemistry or emotionally or mentally or whatever, but that there was something wrong. I thought, it's crazy. I know it sounds nuts, but that I had lung cancer, I had any kind of cancer you could think of, all this. So I went through all these tests. They checked me all out, which was one of the good things, I guess, because I got a really clean bill of health after they went all through it. The doctor I was working with, who was an amazing guy, he told me after I'd gone through all of the testing on the heart stuff, stress testing, the sonogram, all of these different things they did. He said, "Hey, Ron," he goes, "let me put it this way." He said, "If I could swap hearts with you right now," he said, "I would do it." He said, "Your heart's better than a heart." He said, and he kind of explained to me what a normal heart does, and then he goes, "But this is what your heart's doing." He said, "It's incredible." He said, that's not the issue." And so then finally we were talking about it, and we've determined, hey, I'm having panic attacks and I'm having anxiety. I ended up being off work for 5 months. And every time I would try to go back to work, because you'd have periods where you'd start to feel better. Yeah. One of the things that happened to me that was so disturbing was the dizziness. I would start spinning, and I would feel like I was going to pass out. And any kind of stimulus would increase those symptoms. So I couldn't go to church because of all it's because of the people, the music, the lights, everything that's happening. It's just my body couldn't handle the stimulation. Yeah. Couldn't go to restaurants, couldn't go to the movies, couldn't even be around a lot of people. I read a lot and this and that. Fortunately, I was able to. I bought an RV, so I bought a trailer. And my wife and I started camping a lot during that time, and I was just looking for ways to heal, trying to educate myself. I went to psychologists and doctors. I went to counselors and all this, learned about cognitive behavioral therapy and all these different tools that you can use, to kind of, help address anxiety issues and this and that, but recognizing it's a chemical imbalance. I mean, it literally felt like something cracked in my head. Like, there is a, scientific or physiological explanation for what happens there. There's circuits that get connected, and there's other circuits that kind of get broken and things like that. And then once that happens, it's difficult to kind of pull that all back. But there's tools you can use to try, to attempt to do it. So anyways, I eventually made it back to work. I remember the first day I went back in, it took everything I had to go in. I spent 2 hours in one of the plants that I was, gonna start taking care of. I changed my position, so I knew I couldn't continue in the district manager role. So I stepped down back into an account manager role. Something that I was very comfortable with. I was very good at it. It was no stressor. I mean, something I had done for years, for 25, 30 plus years. And I can tell you, it was like going into a lion's cage. I mean, or going into a burning building. And people used to, when I try to explain to people what it felt like, it would be like sitting here and trying to have this conversation right now, but I'm in a burning building. You know, that's how I feel. And so I'm trying to, you know, have a conversation and stay calm, but the building's burning all around me. I mean, that's the kind of feeling you have. It's the fight or flight mechanism that gets fired off, and
yeah, maybe. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about healing. You said something, I think, before we started recording, just kind of a honest moment where you were like, I'm still kind of healing from those moments where I think a lot of us assume it's you get that point, like I said earlier, like you get that point where it's like, okay, I'm good. And I think it's more of a process. And I even think about the passage where Jesus is teaching Peter about healing. He says, forgive them 7 times 70. And it's not like you don't forgive 490 times. Like that's not the code to get to this place. It's a daily decision. You got to choose to forgive daily and kind of in a similar way. Like you got to choose to heal on a regular basis. So maybe you could kind of talk through just like what that healing process looked like. Like,
sure.
How did you kind of recover, or even still like maybe there's still moments where it's like that kind of comes back up.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. So I've had periods of time where I've gone like probably the longest is 2-3 months where I feel perfectly fine. Then something will happen where it kind of sets me back, and then it's like I got to dig myself out of it again, you know. And so I've had prayer. I've had people pray for me, and I've had people, you know, give me scripture and things like that. And I have felt God touch me in that arena. So where I can feel a shift, you know, in my spirit, in my physical body, in my mind, this and that. But then at some point it kind of like gradually, you know, kind of work creeps its way back in. So I've never, you know, and I do things like nutritionally, sugar's a big trigger. I recognize that. And so I try to watch, you know, what I eat and so forth, exercise, a lot of different things. I could tell you a whole bunch of stuff that I've tried to do, you know, and this and that, and all of it helps. But I haven't really ever got to the point where I'm back to where I was before the whole thing happened.
And how long ago was this?
It's been 7 years. Wow. Yeah, right. Well, it'll be 7 years in March. Yeah, so in a couple months. Wow. Yeah, it's been a long time. So I can manage it now. Sometimes it's more challenging than others. I mean, like I was saying, just even, you know, contemplating coming in here, I can feel what's going on. You know, I can allow myself to get worked up. But then I've got, the way that I process it kind of is this. Look, Ron, calm yourself down. Pastor Nathan, Pastor Dan, they're two of your great friends. We've hung out together. We've gone mountain bike riding up in Bogus. You know, worked out at the gym. We've done this. There's nothing really to be anxious about, other than being recorded and millions of people. You know,
we can only hope, right?
And, but anyways, I've kind of learned how to manage it. Sometimes it's easier, you know, than other times. But anyways, yeah. So I mean, you want me to talk a little bit about maybe some of the tools that I've
Yeah, we can maybe back up a little bit, and we'll get there in a second. But obviously, over the last few weeks, the church has been in 21 days of prayer and fasting.
Right.
The first 2 episodes we really talked about, you know, the benefits physically and spiritually to fasting food, and really we even talked about even some nutritional things in there as well too. And then this last week we talked about the benefits, both spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical, about fasting, technology and entertainment and social media, and, you know, some of these things.
Right.
And so really from here, as we get close to this upcoming Sunday, will be the last sort of day of our 21 days of prayer and fasting. And so we didn't say this at the beginning, but the heart for today is really to really kind of dig into what are some takeaways or some rhythms that we can put into place that are centered around even food, nutritional, and even fasting, some of those things, and entertainment, and, you know, getting off of social media, and, you know, being in tune with our emotional and mental health and some of these things. But we really want to talk about, you know, the rhythms of life that will hopefully avoid, you know, potentially what you faced.
Sure.
And, you know, I think there's really, you know, when I think about things, at least for the follower of Jesus, there's really three main areas of life. There's, you know, our work, our careers, and all of these things, which is, you know, so important and vital and even biblical. There's rest, which is biblical as well too. You know, the Bible talks about a Sabbath, and we can talk about, you know, some of that a little later. And then worship, and you know, worship is more than just, you know, lifting your hands and singing songs on Sunday. It's sacrifice, it's giving, it's generosity, it's a pouring out of yourself for the cause of Jesus, you know. And so really these three main arenas of life, we really would like to kind of talk about, you know, some takeaways from these things. I think obviously you'll have a lot to say about work and rest, and maybe some things that you feel like could have avoided, you know, what you had happen, and also, you know, ways moving forward after you did go back to work. You know, what were some things that, you know, you put into place that were rhythms that you, what did you learn after this? You know, what were some rhythms that you gleaned that were healthy from those things?
Okay. Well, one thing is like ask for help, you know, so because I think we all, you know, we have a certain amount of pride in our ability to, whatever the challenge is, you know, hey, we can do it, we can rise to the occasion, but you know, really it's, you know, and maybe we can, maybe we can't, but it's not healthy. And so when we're, you know, when we're feeling overwhelmed or it's just too much, we need to share that with other people and just say, hey, I need some help here. You know, I'm just, I've extended myself as far as I can go. And so asking for help. The other thing is that, and I don't know why this is, but it seems like people that, you know, put themselves in these kind of positions where they're just givers, you know, they just give till they've got nothing left. They'll give to causes and to people around them and everything else, but they don't ever give anything, you know, to themselves as far as like you said, like taking the time to just, you know, whether it's pray or whether it's just self-reflection or whatever, or you know, taking care of myself physically, taking some time out for a walk or a run or whatever it is you like to do, and this and that. But, you know, you have to get to a point to where you start prioritizing yourself.
That's good.
And it may sound selfish, but here's the thing: if I'm not healthy emotionally, spiritually, and physically, then whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish, whether it's ministry or work or being a good husband or a dad or grandpa or whatever, suffers. We can't perform, we can't function in those roles at 100% if we're burnt out. So you're not only doing something to you know, to help yourself, but it also helps you to become better at helping others, and then also when you are working, I think it's more focused, you know, and so forth and so on like that. So you have to take time out for yourself. So for me, it's like I can share with you kind of what a day looks like for me now. It's a little bit different now because I'm not working, so I don't have all of the commitments and pressures and things like that. But even when I was working, I absolutely. I wanted to say this too. It's something you need to address. Like you said, there's three arenas. It's the physical, it's the emotional, and then it's the spiritual. And you have to address it from all three of those areas. You could be really strong spiritually, but be very weak physically or weak emotionally. and you're not going to be functioning
Right.
at no 100%.
It doesn't matter.
Right, it doesn't matter. Or you could be all buffed and could run 100 miles and this and that, but if you're spiritually bankrupt, you're going to be a mess, you know. So it's really, that is the approach. You have to approach it from those three arenas. So you have to do things to physically nurture yourself, to emotionally and mentally nurture yourself, which I tie into our soul, you know, things that nurture, you know, who we are deep down. And then the spiritual side of it, where we have to stay plugged in. So for me, what I do now, and even when I was working, is I try to start the day off, even if it's just one scripture, just one verse or something like that, just a daily verse. But I have more time right now, so I'll spend more time in that. And where I've kind of like landed recently, I bumped into a guy at the gym, and he, I don't know how, I'm not sure how it came up. Well, yeah, we were talking about another friend of ours who we could tell something was going on and blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, is he struggling with like anxiety and stuff? Because I thought if he was, you know, maybe I could do something to help him out. And so we got to talking about that, which opened up the fact that this guy had PTSD. He was a Vietnam veteran. He's in his mid-70s. He's in incredible shape, but he was on like full disability from what he had experienced, you know, when he was in war. And so then I started sharing and this and that. So he'd kind of worked his way through some things, and I've worked my way. So we were sharing some things, and so he threw out to me. He said, "Ron," he said, "check out Psalm 119." And he said, plug into that, and he said, just see what it does for you. So I did. I pulled it up. I was like, okay, Psalm 119. It doesn't take too long to, you know, get through a chapter in Psalms. Well, 119 does take a long time. It's like 170 some odd, you know, verses. Yeah. So I start, and that's one of the things I say is that, hey, if you're looking to just get started, Psalms is for me is the place to go. Yeah. It's just there's so many just, you know, verses in there that just speak to the heart, sharing God's heart, and
I was just saying it's very honest and
and I've also kind of landed on the Passion Translation. Yeah. So I really like the way especially Psalms comes across, you know, in the Passion Translation. It's just, anyways, it ministers to me big time. So I'll start off doing that. I'll spend time in prayer. The other thing that I would encourage people to do is that a lot of times we pray, but we don't stop long enough to listen. Yeah, that's good. You know. And so to just put ourselves in a place where we can, where we're just relaxed and we can just say, like, maybe, God, is there anything that you wanted to say to me this morning? Is there something that you know, what would you like to accomplish or do in my life today? Or do you have something to say to me? And it's not going to be something like, well, you know, I need you to go stand. Or go stand on the street corner with Jesus is coming back, you know, and repent and all this kind of stuff. Right. But it's probably something like, I'm proud of you, you know, I love you, you know, something like that. I'm there for you, you know, something encouraging like that. But if we don't stop to listen, we're just kind of throwing these prayers out and then moving on. We'll definitely miss something. So I take time to stop and listen. Another thing that I'll do a lot of times is declarations. So declarations are just like words out, you know, promises out of the Bible or words that God has spoken, you know, through the Bible about us, His love for us, His commitment to us, His grace for our lives, things like that. And I'll reflect on those, or I'll speak those declarations over my life. Now, you can find this stuff on the internet. You know, there's so much available out there. It takes a quick little click of the button, you can get all these really cool declarations and things like that. There's actually even there's a YouTube video that goes for like 12 minutes where this guy just prays declarations over your life. It's really powerful, man. I mean, you spend 12 minutes with just somebody praying the promises of God over your life, you know, in the morning, it'll radically change your day. It's awesome. So I kind of do all that, and then I kind of move into the physical part. I do, like, years ago, if you'd have told me about yoga and stuff, I'd be like, well, I'm not doing yoga, you know. That's, you know, for girls or whatever. I'm not wearing tights and all that kind of stuff. That's the image I had. But it's really just stretch, you know, it's really stretching, and it's very, very painful. I mean, I'd rather almost, you know, like stomp on my foot than do a 20-minute yoga session. It's painful. But it's good for you, and it's also a time it's very quiet. You're just stretching. You're just kind of taking care of your body. You're doing some things like that. Then I will go into, and again, this, you know, for some people this might sound weird, but, you know, I just look at it this way. Hey, God created our bodies to work a certain way. And there's things that we can do to, you know, accentuate how we feel physically and this and that by, you know, whatever. So I do some like breathing exercises. Some people will, you know, kind of do that, and they'll talk about meditation and so forth, and then that gets some people thinking, well, meditation. But you can meditate on whatever you want to meditate on. So I meditate on the Lord and His goodness. I just reflect on Him. I thank Him as I'm breathing and just doing that. I'll just thank Him for the peace that He's put in my life. Thank Him for my family. Thank Him for my friends, church. If something comes up, so I'm kind of praying and breathing and doing all of this kind of stuff. Gets my body all hyped up, and then I end up with worship. So that's what I do. So people ask me, like, well, I'll wake up at 5 o'clock or 6 in the morning, and I'm not doing anything until it's like, is it already 10 o'clock, you know? Because I have the time now to do these kinds of things. But you can condense it. If I need to push it down into 30 minutes, I can do that, or an hour. But I just shorten things up, but I try to get everything still in there. And that, for me, has really been helping, because it just brings a peace and it brings a calm to me. Then I'm in the gym, and then I'm going about life. I'm going around with my, you know, watch my grandkids or whatever. But that's what I try to do every morning.
I thought it was really interesting as you were kind of telling your story. I think I assumed, like, because I know you're very disciplined, you work out all the time. I assumed that was a reaction to all of that. So it's kind of interesting to hear, like, you were doing all those things. You were training for a triathlon, and all of this was going on. So it's just kind of interesting. Like, you need all of these things. Like, these are so important to have these different rhythms in our lives, and they're so important.
I mean, if you could go back to before the burnout, I guess we could call it, what specifically with work, you know, and I think, you know, some of this, you know, we can get into it in a second, but really the Lord, it's very clear, even in Exodus 20, verse 8, it says, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. The Sabbath is something that, you know, is very scriptural. It's very prominent throughout Scripture. Jesus, you know, He remembered it and practiced the Sabbath as well, too. It's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament. It's very prominent in Scripture, which really, Sabbath is just a word that means stop. And something that's come up over the last 2 weeks that I've heard you talk about, too, is that many times we can find that we get ourselves into habits or cycles or rhythms that just kind of keep going automatically. And without something that we are very intentional about that stops that cycle, that's this cycle of unhealth. You know, first week we talked about how, you know, many people can cope by just eating. You know, we eat something like sugar or something that tastes good, and, you know, these endorphins are released in our body, and it feels good, and it makes us feel better, and so we create this cycle in our lives of unhealthy eating and, you know, whatever. And then last week we talked about, you know, even with technology and entertainment, and, you know, we get these endorphins or this, you know, this hit that, what is it, a dopamine hit,
right,
when we look at our phones and we get all these likes on Instagram or Facebook, or we, you know, watch some movie that really is entertaining for us, and we get in this cycle.
Yeah.
And the power of a Sabbath is that word stop, meaning that we take that cycle that we're in some ways can get trapped in very easily, and we stop it, and we do something intentional that stops that cycle. And I think we can find scriptural things to back up that really we are supposed to have a weekly Sabbath, but also a daily Sabbath.
Yep.
You know, Jesus, even when he over and over in Scripture, in Mark chapter 1 verse 34 or 35, it says, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. We see this throughout Scripture a lot. And so it's really safe to assume that nearly, if not every day, Jesus also had a little mini Sabbath where he stopped that cycle of whatever it is was happening in his life. So there's a weekly Sabbath that we can see, and then we can see a daily Sabbath of stopping that cycle. And so if you were to go back before this burnout season of your life, what would you have changed when it comes to work and possibly hours or days off or Sabbath or, you know, even daily rhythms in your life? You know, would you have been more intentional with this, you know, declarations and quiet time and, you know, this solitude every single day, but also then once a week being very intentional to stop that cycle? And do you feel like that could have prevented what happened?
Yeah, I believe that if I would have known what the future held and what was going to happen, I believe I could have done something to circumvent it. Like you said, we start self-medicating. So we run out of maybe we don't have the options that that I have now.
Right.
So the options looked different. So you'd self-medicate, like I said, through food, through movies, through, whatever, things along that line. I felt like I almost lived two different lives. Like I had a life when I came home that was with my friends and my family and church, and then but most of my life revolved around work, people at work and places and this and that. So what I would have done is I would have just asked for help. I would have just had to say, without having whatever the fear I might have had of repercussions, just tell people, I can't do this. It's too much. It's more than what I can handle. And just been able to say no. Been able to just say no to some of the requests and some of the things that people wanted me to commit to. And then also, just like you said, pull away and rest, shut down, just get yourself completely shut down. I was attached all the time thanks to our cell phones, 24/7. Somebody could call me up at any given moment and change the course of my day.
Sure.
So I think what I'd do is just, you got to pull away from all of that. And I think that even today, even in, regardless of what I went through and this and that, I like to get outdoors. And one of the reasons I like to get way outdoors, like into the backcountry and wilderness areas, there's no cell phones. There's no coverage back in there. And so you're forced to not be able to communicate or not be able to see what's going on. And man, I'll tell you, that'll transform you. Just changes, your whole life when you're back in there in a situation like that.
Yeah.
But definitely for me too, and I think when we get in those positions, we have a tendency, instead of pressing into God, we have a tendency to pull away. We start pulling back because we're not healthy. We're not thinking rationally. Things are just happening that that aren't the best for us.
Yeah.
We don't process as well, and this and that, and so it's absolutely critical, I think, start your day off with the Lord. And then also take time, like what I said, for your families and so forth, and for yourself and this and that. But yeah, that's what I would have learned, how to say no and break away.
Do you think that it was more hours that you worked, or like amount of responsibility, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, a combination. I was physically worn out, and then I was just, emotionally and mentally spent.
Yeah.
What do you think kind of leads to that, getting to that place where I think we know, we hear stories of burnout. We know like that's not supposed to happen, but obviously people still get there. Is it just trying to impress people? Is it maybe insecurity for some people? Maybe for you, just explain like what do you think was that kind of driving factor to focus so much on work and worry so much about getting all these things done? Like, have you ever thought about maybe there was like something kind of in you that was kind of leading?
I know exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Just I'm a people pleaser, and so I was in a role where I felt responsibility to customers and to the account managers that were working under me.
Yeah.
I felt responsible for them. I felt responsible for their happiness, for their satisfaction, for their quality of life, the job-work balance and all, or work-life balance and all of these different things. And I wanted people to like me, I wanted to be good at what I was doing. And I was very good at it. I got lots of accolades and so forth. But the cost, though,
Sure.
It wasn't worth it. It really wasn't. I'd give anything. I could remember early on, I'd say, if I could just chop my left hand off and that would sever the anxiety from my life, I would cut that thing off so quick it would make your head spin. That's how much of a, how much of an impact, or how much it kind of destroys or takes away from your quality of life. It was just all-consuming.
I think sometimes, I think, from my experience, different personalities, that driving factor can sometimes be different. I think, like for instance, my personality, would be more of like the fear of being, looked at as weak, being vulnerable enough.
Yeah, that's another piece of it.
I need help, or, whatever. I think some people, it's the, the success and the achievements, the people pleasing aspect. But what's interesting is I think sometimes, and maybe this is true or untrue in your life, but sometimes it feels as though to put in place some of these rhythms in life, things like taking a Sabbath once a week and literally stopping and not even having your phone. Like, if your phone is where work can get to you on your day off, then maybe it's turning your phone off for an entire day. Like, I think that we've downplayed the importance of a Sabbath and just, oh, you have your day off, and
sure,
I'm not in the office, but I'm looking and working all day long because of my phone. Well, is that really stopping that cycle in your life? So things like a Sabbath, or waking up early enough to not just barely get a shower, brush your teeth, and put some clothes on and be at work on time, but to wake up early enough to get up and to have some solitude, isolated time with Jesus, and meditating on Scripture, or breathing, or whatever it is where you sort of stop that cycle daily. Or maybe it's exercising and eating healthy and all of these things. And so I think sometimes we can honestly look at it and go, for me to put all of those rhythms in place to avoid a burnout down the road can be so much work that we just don't do it.
Right.
And we pray that the crash never happens. What would, I guess, you say to that? Was that in some ways your mentality? It was like, not that you lived a disciplined life for most of things, but maybe it'd be safe to assume that there were just a few maybe Sabbath things that could have avoided it, that were off. But it was just like, for you to put those things fully in place, it just wasn't worth that discipline or that rhythm or whatever,
Yeah, basically, well, I would have done anything that I could have possibly done to prevent this from happening. And so what I tell people, because I've experienced this, and people know about it friends of friends, things like that.
Sure.
I'll have people that'll contact me and they'll say, "Hey, Ron, can I talk to you about? Can you talk about what happened to you? Does that bother you to do that?" And I'm like, "No, I can talk about it. What's going on?" And they'll go, "Well," and then they start sharing kind of what's happening with their lives and how they're suffering from stress and anxiety and whatever and this and that. And I just encourage people, look, these are warning signs. So you can keep pushing. You can, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting the same results. If you don't change anything, whatever's currently happening is going to continue to happen. You've got to break that cycle somewhere. And so I encourage people, you've got to back off. You've got to figure out a way to, manage whatever it is that you're doing, but also protect yourself. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're going to crash and burn. These are warning signs. So I had warning signs. Your body tells you something's not right. Mm-hmm. But we just kind of get over that little hump, and then we might back off for a little bit, but a week or two out, we're right back into the same rhythm and same routine. So you're right. It does take discipline. It takes a commitment to just say, hey, this is how much these are, maybe even make a list of priorities. These are the priorities for my life, not for work, not for something like that, but just my life, for the people, for my family and all of this. Figure out what those are. And then, put something down on paper or or mentally, make a commitment to it. But say, this is how much time I'm willing to do for this, and this is how much time I'm willing to do for that. I'm willing to give this much time to work. The rest of this time is going to these other areas. And don't, so one of the things that I did, excuse me, so I left the company I worked for after 5 years and went to work for another company. I never took a vacation that whole 5 years. I mean, I'd go on vacation, but I was still handling everything that was happening with my customers while I was on vacation. So my family'd be like swimming, doing all these things. I'm looking for a phone, a phone booth or trying to get cell phone reception so I could put out fires while we're doing all that. So I left for a while, and then I ended up coming back. I made this commitment. When I commit to my family or myself, that commitment holds the same amount of weight as a commitment I'm making to a customer or my employer. So once I make that commitment, I stick to it. And I had some times where there was conflict, where there's big problems. They wanted me to be there, and I told them, "Hey, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I'm already committed." They're like, "Well, what are you committed to?" "I'm committed to a vacation with my family." Yeah.
Well, and I know there's a lot to that. I've read, and I think this is a good practice that my wife and I have tried, is that, this Sabbath idea or vacation or time off or, not working or whatever you want to call it. But, we can see there's a daily small chunk of time. That's a daily thing that's important to just set aside from work, set aside from anything that needs you to go away by yourself, to spend time with God and to kind of reset your mind and your heart or whatever. Then there's the one day every 7 days that you push away from work, that you stop that cycle in your life, that you turn off any communication that work can get to you, and you take a day off with your family. Then I've heard it said that 7 days or a week every year that you take a vacation, that you allow your body to be away from work, to not have access to you, to whatever. And then, furthermore, that every 7 years to take 1 month away from work. Now, I understand that, there's work boundaries and things that fall in there, but I do think that we have lost as a culture the need for these things, these Sabbaths, these vacations, and for at home, I think that that's a good roadmap for, in an ideal situation, this is what you do once a day, once a week. once a year for 1 week, and then once every 7 years for an extended period of time, if you can swing that. To really just, I've read studies about when you are on vacation, that it takes like 3 days to really even fully unplug. And then it takes like an additional 4 days to really start to allow that, vacation to have positive benefits in your life. And then, so in some ways, sometimes even 1 week vacation isn't even enough time to fully detox from these things and the way our bodies and minds all function and everything.
Right.
And so, I even recommend, if you can, more. That's the story from my life. Like, I get on vacation and I feel antsy, I'm like, what are we going to do? Like, I can't just sit here by the beach, I need to do something. And I feel physically ill sometimes. And, I've made it just like, I'd rather just not go on vacation sometimes. And it's not healthy.
Yeah.
Like, straight up, it is not healthy. And, we've got to, I think, discipline ourselves enough to push through. I think there's a trust aspect, like you said, of trusting that other people can put out fires other than you, trusting that the world still spins when we aren't connected to our phones or at a phone booth in vacation, and all of these types of things. And so, I just think there's so much value there.
I think you mentioned this earlier, but like the temptation is to kind of run away from those thoughts of, I'm pushing it too hard, or I need a break, I need a Sabbath. And it's just kind of interesting how, like, we know we have these warning signs, but there's just kind of this thing in us that just says, I can't do this. I don't have enough time.
Right.
It's not going to work with my schedule. My work needs this. Family needs this, or they'll be okay, or whatever the excuse is. But it's interesting how we can, like, convince ourselves that this is the way it has to be, even though we have these warning signs that we've heard before, and we just kind of keep pushing them down. But
maybe we could list some of those warning signs. Like, I know as we talk some on staff, we feel like when we get really stressed that, for me, I have trouble making decisions. It's just like, I actually felt like my personality over the years, one of the strengths that I've had is being able to make good decisions. I can make decisions. And then all of a sudden, I get really, really stressed, and a lot of stuff's happening. And I'm like in my closet in the morning, like just making a stupid decision of what to put on. And I'm just like freaking out, or, just some little thing like, happens at the church, and, we need to make a decision. And I'm like, I don't recognize myself. I'm like, I can't decide. What about this? And what about this? And it's just like, I think your mind is just not, it's so full that you haven't allowed it to, detox. You haven't stopped that cycle enough to just let it all go. And then that's what causes. So, maybe you mentioned your heart began to race and your, dizziness and some of that stuff, but maybe even a little more earlier warning signs before panic attacks of, like, maybe littler things that, that you noticed, or maybe you didn't, but.
Oh, yeah. So you kind of hit on one of them. So one of the common things, and I've talked to other people about this, is when you do take vacation, you get sick. Mm-hmm. That's one of the indicators there, because it's kind of like your body stays in this fight or flight, response. You got the adrenaline pumping, cortisol levels are elevated, all this crazy stuff's going on. Mm-hmm. And then when you get yourself in a place where now I can relax, your body is just so depleted, and so chewed up that all of a sudden you're sick. So that would happen to me. I'd notice that. I'd go somewhere and I'd get nauseous, really nauseous. I'm like, man, why am I so nauseous, or why don't I feel good? And usually it was nausea is what I was getting, but that was a indicator. Mm-hmm. Again, there's a host of them. I mean, as far as, like, I think most people can kind of self-evaluate and recognize, I'm under too much stress. This isn't healthy. Elevated blood pressure, things like that.
I think little things. I don't know if you found this, but little things can become big things.
Little.
You know, sometimes it'll just be the littlest thing, and it'll kind of set you off, and you're really frustrated or angry or
Yeah.
you know, things like that.
You get short with people that
Yeah.
you're either with, maybe not that you work with, because you usually hold it together at work, but you take it out then on your family, you know, on your wife, on your kids.
Well, and that's one thing I noticed even as at work, I would feel pretty good, you know, and I didn't have a crash like you did, but I have had some anxiety this past summer, and, you know, I've been working through some of that. But I noticed that at work, when that adrenaline is flowing and you know, you're making decisions and you're, you know, enhancing the kingdom of God. Or
kind of feels good.
Yeah, it feels good. And you're like, you're in it and you're having meetings and you're, you know, whatever. And then I'd get home at night, and all of a sudden it would just be like, oh, like I had trouble breathing, and my stomach was nauseous and things. And I genuinely think, because, you know, those adrenals were pumping while I'm at work, and you're in the flow of those things, and then you get home and you have nothing to do, and you know, you sit down for the first time today and put your feet up, and all of a sudden it's just like, whoa, you know, like what are we doing here? And my body would start going haywire. And, you know, so that, I think that's a sign, you know, as well too. I think sometimes, you know, people that I've talked to, they'll feel that way and they'll avoid it by, even when they are at home, they're not just relaxing and spending time with the family. They're out in the yard, you know, pulling weeds and, you know, going crazy, keeping themselves busy, because it's the moment that they're not busy that then all of a sudden, you know, things start to kind of go haywire. So,
Yeah.
I think one thing that I just think of is, I think if I'm like, maybe like thinking about something I shouldn't do, or making a decision too quickly and trying to move on to something, I know I'll hear myself convincing myself this is the right decision, or this is fine. And even though I know like there's warning signs, I'll like, if I start to hear that in my head, I've finally realized like, oh, maybe I should listen to those questions rather than just ignoring them, and actually paying attention to some of those things.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would strongly recommend, I mean, so there's things we can do physically to nurture ourselves, things we can do emotionally. There's tools we can use to deal with stress and anxiety, the cognitive behavioral therapy. There's breathing exercises you can do. There's mind exercises you can do, and all of this. But ultimately, for me, it's like I just have to give it all to God. You know, just completely trust Him with me, with the situation that I'm in, and recognize that because this is what I'll tell other people. He has a future set before you that's filled with hope, and it's filled with blessing. That's His will for your life. And so that's His will for my life too. And so I'm always wanting to improve. I'm always wanting to get stronger and better. But I can find a certain sense of peace and contentment with where I'm at right now. Part of that is instead of always focusing on the woe is me, I'm dizzy this morning, you know, this is going to be a horrible day. I'm like, man, this is the day the Lord made. I'm going to rejoice and be glad in it. This is going to be an awesome day today. And I'll kind of, you know, like that, look outside, see the sunshine or whatever, and this and that. And then also stop long enough to where I'll say things like, God, would you give me discernment for today? Would you give me wisdom as I go forward? And this is even for working, or if you're not working or whatever. Would you help me to prioritize? Would you help me to organize my thoughts? Would you provide time for me also to find rest? Would you, you know, and just really give God an opportunity to minister to you and minister, you know, through you as you step into your day. The other thing is, like, we can get into positions where we start believing lies about ourselves. So we start thinking, well, this is God's will for my life. Woe is me, you know, these kinds of thoughts. And say, God, you can lay that at the Lord's feet and say, Lord, is there a lie I'm believing about myself right now? Is there something that I'm believing that contradicts your word or doesn't align with what you're speaking over me? Would you reveal that to me? And then would you replace that with your truth? You know, so maybe the lie is, well, you brought it on yourself, and so live with it. You did it to yourself, and now you deserve this. Okay, so that's the lie. God, what's the truth? Well, the truth is that you didn't bring it, you didn't do this to yourself. It's a consequence maybe of just life and things that you got caught up in. But by my stripes you're healed. You know, that I have grace and strength to get you through the day. In your weakness, I can show my strength. You know, so he starts speaking these kinds of things through you, and it just transforms your mind. It changes their whole perspective on going into that day. So instead of going into that day, woe is me, you go into it with the promises of God just being poured into your heart and mind. And again, it's listening. So it's not just asking, it's stopping and listening and reflecting and this and that. Yeah. So we were involved with an inner healing ministry for several years. We've kind of taken a little hiatus from that right now, but some of the tools that we would use, or some of the things that we would be able to help people through, is like we'd say, well, think, what is the lens that you're looking through when you look at life? What colored lenses are you wearing? Like a pair of glasses, are they rose colored? Are they perfectly clear? Are they blacked out? I mean, what's it look like, you know? And get people to reflect a little bit on how am I perceiving life? How am I looking at things? And then, okay, so that's how maybe you are looking at it. How do you think God would want you to look through it? Would you like to take the lenses that you're looking at life with right now and maybe try a pair of spiritual pharmaceutical grade lenses that God has for you and see what life might look like through those? Yeah, let's try that and do an exchange like that, and it just changes your whole perspective now. And so you just approach the day, you approach life, you approach people through a whole different perspective, because you're starting to see life through the lens of the Father or the Son. The other thing that you can do sometimes, if it's just like it just gets to be too much and everything's garbage and this and that, we could do something what we call the divine exchange. So we take all of our garbage, all the things we're struggling with. It could be work pressure, family pressure, health pressure, all of these things. Put them in a box, and we hand them off to the Lord. We just, Lord, I'm giving this to you. Yeah. Would you take this? But then not just give it to him, but then what do you have for me in exchange for it? Take the box from him that he's open it up and look at it and what's in it, and start seeing things like joy, hope, grace. All of these types of things. And it just completely will just, put you in a whole new, frame of mind.
Well, you're touching on, really a rhythm of worship that even is in what I think is a healthy balance of rhythms in our life. But what's interesting is I think we've made worship nothing more than the music portion of the services on Sunday. But what's interesting is the Bible talks about a sacrifice of praise, and in fact in the Old Testament, the way that before the new covenant and the access to the presence of God through the Holy Spirit, and before all of that in the Old Testament, they had to sacrifice that. Well, first they had to start by building an altar, that was very specific, and it took work and it took energy, and they had to stack this wood on top of, each other, and then they had to take an animal that was their livelihood, it was their food, it was their job, it was their income, it was their resource. They had to sacrifice that animal on this altar, and that was their worship. And now we live under a new covenant where we have access to the presence of God without all of that, but we don't lose the truth that, that old covenant act of worship really was. And I think the interesting thing is as human beings, since Adam and Eve, the fall in the garden, I'm not sure if we default to sacrifice. I just don't know if it's in the human nature to, if not forced into that place, we're like, you know what, I just want to sacrifice something today. I want to really do something that just feels uncomfortable to me today. We default to comfort. We default to what feels good. We default to, what our sin nature desires. Mm-hmm. And so I think interestingly about, even a Sabbath, forcing ourselves to stop, interestingly about, forcing yourself to take off those glasses of the way that you see your life and putting on those glasses of the way that God wants us to see our life. These things are worship. These are done through forcing our bodies into submission in some ways. And that's worship. That's why when we're in the corporate gatherings, all of our worship leaders say, hey, we want you to lift your hands this morning as just a sacrifice, as a surrender to God. Why? Because we look around and we feel silly sometimes lifting our hands, and maybe we're tired that day, and it's a sacrifice. Yeah. Or maybe you just feel like there's just an urging to just jump up and down and worship and just shout the goodness of God. And what? It's a sacrifice. You are doing something that not a single person when we gather together really feels like doing that. But it's an outward expression of an inward conviction. Mm-hmm. That's what worship is. It's I'm going to express something outward because of what God's doing on the inside of my life. And it forces our souls into submission. It forces our souls into operating under a way that God wants us to operate. And I think there's so much truth in all of that. And literally, like you said, exchanging the things that I don't want to deal with the things that you have for me. That's done. That's done in the hug with Jesus. That's done in worship, where all of a sudden we go, okay, God, I feel anxious. I feel tired. I feel kind of embarrassed to do this. But you're in worship, in your car, in church, whatever, at home, and you just lift your hands. God, I surrender. Not my will, but your will be done. And man, all of a sudden, there's an encounter that happens when you express something out. That's why even generosity in our giving, where we force our souls into submission. It breaks the back of greed in our life by forcing our souls into submission with what God has for us. And so I think that's a rhythm, that has to be very, very, very prevalent in our lives. Obviously, balance of work. We got to go to work. We got to make an income. We got to, provide ends meet for our family. And we've got to make sure that we balance that with rest, with Sabbath. But I think the next stage to that is, even the Bible in Hebrews says, and let us not neglect our meeting together, our assembling together. And I know even you mentioned that in that season at church was a lot because of the stimulus of that. But I love that you didn't forsake worship. You didn't forsake the sacrifice of praise. God, I worship you. Even though things are hard right now, I trust you, I worship you, and I'm gonna bring you something that costs me something. I'm gonna bring you a sacrifice of praise. And man, when that happens, it's just the way the kingdom of God operates. All of a sudden, the presence of God he always responds to a sacrifice. Yep. And so I think that, we see it all of the time and you said it earlier, that when things start happening in people's lives, many times worship is the first thing that goes. We just see it all the time. You're navigating through a divorce or, a loss of a loved one or a busy season at work. And the first thing that goes is worship. The first thing to go is the meeting of yourself, to the assembling of yourself. A worldwide pandemic hits. The first thing that goes is church, is worship. and it needs to be. It's a vital, important rhythm in your life that needs to be there. You know, maybe I understand there's circumstances that may cause, you know, coming to church to not be able to happen, but the worship aspect has to remain.
Yeah.
And so
I think you touched on something where I think when things get hard or when things get difficult, or maybe you can't hear God, the temptation is to turn away from God even more and look another way. And I found this, that sometimes those moments where maybe it seems hardest for me to hear God or understand what God is doing, it's like if I can lean into God in those moments, some of the greatest things that God's shown me came through that. Or I've heard it explained this way, how like some of the like treasures that we find like in the ocean, or all these pirate ships that are stored, I think, in the Gulf somewhere. When these hurricanes will come in, they'll bring them to the shore, and it's like these kind of terrifying moments of the storm, and in those storms, some of the greatest treasures come in those moments. And I just think like the temptation is to not have devotions. The temptation is to not worship when things get hard, when things get difficult, or you're too busy and you can't make time. And so my mind goes to this, like just setting some of those daily rhythms, setting some of those things. And it's interesting how some of the most business-minded people can have vision for work and have these things, but they have no vision for their family or no vision for their devotional life, and they can't seem to make those times and those moments important. So I would just maybe recommend this, just figuring out a time daily to get in the Word. Like you said, start with Psalms or start with the book of John. Go to the Bible app and just pick a plan and start somewhere right there. And rather than, I think sometimes we make it so complicated. I know for me, like it helps, like with work, I have like a schedule and a plan I follow. I do the same thing at home where if I don't have this plan, it's not going to be filled by the Bible. It's going to be probably scrolling on my phone or doing something else. And so I think being really practical just to fill in some of those places. But maybe if you guys have some takeaways, some things that maybe just kind of lasting thoughts that you just want to.
I like to say, I say it all the time, but hope is not a strategy. You know, like I think, you know, even for you to like, you know, you mentioned earlier about hearing these things happen to other people, and you're like, well, it's not going to happen to me, or I hope it doesn't happen to me. But that's not a strategy, and I love that it's like, what is your strategy to make sure that this doesn't happen to you?
Yeah.
What is your actual strategy to ensure that you don't have a burnout season or a crash, or, you know, whatever you want to put on it? And I think that there has to be a strategy. Otherwise, again, we default to just, you know, getting closer and closer to that cliff.
Right.
And so, you know, maybe even for those listening, if some of those like early warning signs, they're going, well, hey, that kind of happens to me some, you know, or even some of the later warning signs, you know, that and maybe people haven't quite gotten to, you know, where you were, a full-on burnout, but they are sensing some of those warning signs. You know, what would you recommend them do? I mean, should they get professional help? Should they, you know, institute, you know, days off? Or, you know, what would you recommend to people who are saying, man, this sounds like me, and I need to do something about this?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times if we're not in a crisis, unfortunately, we're not willing to do anything different. It takes a crisis to get us to change. But I would just recommend that, you know, and it could be, so some of the symptoms also could be things like where you have stomach, you know, just stomach issues, you'll have weird pains, your hair could be falling out. I mean, there's a host of symptoms from stress. So if you have any of those types of things going on, recognize, okay, I've got to do something different. Mm-hmm. If I don't make a change, it's just going to get worse. Yeah. Or you'll just stay in that constant state of stress. They call it the new heart disease, you know, because there's so many people now that have stress because of just the way that our society is structured. We're always being overwhelmed with all kinds of different things. But so I'd put a plan together, and I do a little bit of research. But like I said, you're going to have to take some time for self-reflection, for self-care. You're going to have to be able to say no. You're going to have to be able to ask for help. And it's important that you take time to do those types of things that nurture you, whatever that might be. If it's just a walk, it's not like we're taking 6 hours out of the day.
Right.
It could be just a nice walk. It could be a time where you just sit and listen to some worship music and just spend some time in the presence of the Lord and just allow Him to minister to you. But do something that brings healing and wholeness and benefit to yourself spiritually, physically, and emotionally, and you need to do it every day.
Yeah.
But it's way more complicated than that. But if I'm trying to just get somebody going on it, just learn about it. And there's tools and things like that. But there's a lot of resources out there.
Yeah. Any that you want to kind of plug on here that are good resources for people to kind of manage some of this? Or?
Well, as far as books and things like that,
sure, books,
of course,
podcasts,
videos.
I'm not.
I haven't really heard many I've heard some things, and I've listened to some Christian, like leaders and things like that, kind of talk about anxiety, but unless you've really experienced it, it's really difficult. It's hard to connect with somebody who's never been there, never done that, because there is really no formula. I believe that God has the power to instantaneously just touch me and heal me from it, and I believe that He'll do that at some point. And I even think that He has touched me in different degrees and things like that. So I keep pressing in. I keep trusting God, for complete healing. But the author is Claire Weeks, and I can't remember the name of the book now, but that is one of the best books for somebody who's going through anxiety. It was written back in the early 60s, I think 64, but even people today that deal in this arena, they will reference her research and the work that she did, because she what it does is it helps people that are struggling in this area to recognize they're going to be okay. Yeah. This is what's happening. It's just these physiological things that are taking place because of the adrenaline, because of the chemistry that's kind of messed up. It's normal. It's not going to kill you. No one's died from anxiety, and you can get through it.
Is it Hope and Help Your Nerves?
That's it.
Yeah. Hope and Help Your Nerves Into Anxiety Now by Claire Weeks.
That's a really good book. And then there's another one called, I want to say, Free from Anxiety in 21 Days or 21 Days to Freedom. Try that one. It's a Christian lady. She was a leader in her church. She was just a go-getter. She fed, she said, off of adrenaline and overcommitment and things like that, and then she completely blew up. Wow. It completely derailed her. 21 Days to Freedom.
Was that it? Fearless
in 21 Days, yeah.
Fearless in 21 Days by Sarah E. Ball.
That's a great book.
A Survivor's Guide to Overcoming Anxiety.
Yeah. So Claire Weeks' book is more from a secular perspective, and she brings in science into it, but also how the Lord dealt with her, and how she how she just sought after God for answers and things like that, and how she made discoveries along the way. It's powerful.
Yeah. Well, Ron, thank you so much, man, for sharing your story. And I know it's not easy to talk about things that have happened, and man, we appreciate the journey that you've been on, and I think that something that last week we talked about was Sean. If you hadn't caught that podcast, it's very, very good, specifically about social media and, you know, the news and entertainment and how we can get really messed up from that stuff. But we realize that this is probably not something that's going away in society, that it's probably getting worse before it gets better. And, you know, I think we all, as 21st century Americans, you know, deal with this stuff on some level, whether we're aware of it or not. It's just almost impossible not to be. You know, like you said, we're getting it from all angles at all times. And it's going to have, you know, negative effects if we don't, like we said, put some rhythms and things in place that prevent these. And it's just how close you get to the edge without falling off, you know, is how I feel about it, honestly. And so appreciate you being with us. And, you know, we really value you and leadership in our church and sharing your story. So
thank you.
I want to let you guys know if you got any comments, any questions. We'll do our best to get to that. But hey, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Ron.
You're welcome. Man. Thank you guys for inviting me. Yeah. I just, you know, Jesus said, he talks about the abundant life. You know, I've come that you might have life and life more abundantly. I love life. I mean, I'm always like, you know, I remembered how much I enjoyed life and how much I love to do things. And I'm like, I'm not giving up. I'll keep pressing in.
Come on.
And until, you know, the Lord takes me away. But I've experienced abundant life, and I want to stay plugged into that as much as I possibly can. So anything short of that, whether it's anxiety or whether it's something else, I'm pressing in. I want to experience the abundant life that Jesus talks about.
So good. So good.
Awesome. We'll see you guys.
Thank you.